As it has been noted by scholars, there are certain similarities between Machiavelli's and Nietzsche's philosophical thinking. Perhaps this similarity springs from the same mindset which both Machiavelli and Nietzsche shared, particularly their anti-Christian sentiment which went so far as to subordinate morality to politics. Nietzsche's anti-Platonic and anti-Christian morality makes Nietzsche gravitate towards Machiavelli. It is the aim of this video to find similarities between the way these two philosophers thought. Our exclusive source concerning Machiavelli's political thinking will be his most famous work, The Prince. Given the short expanse of this video, we can but briefly touch upon only two themes: Christianity and the Machiavellian prince as the Übermensch. Perhaps the best place to start our exploration would be Nietzsche's The Will to Power, not because it is Nietzsche's most valuable work, but because compared to his other works, it is the book in which Machiavelli is mentioned the most. Let us take the issue of Christianity. By reading Nietzsche closely, we realize it is not simply their anti-Christian morality that interlinks Machiavelli and Nietzsche. Although Christianity presupposes an unpolitical society, according to Nietzsche, Christianity is Machiavellian in practice. For Nietzsche, when one considers the actions of the papacy and Luther, one sees that they are just as much followers of Machiavelli as any immoralist or tyrant. According to Machiavelli, thanks to Christian tradition and Christianity's un-Machiavellian practice, much of the history of Christianity was dominated by brevity of the reigns of the popes. For Machiavelli, courageous and Machiavellian popes were the exceptions rather than the rule. However, as Nietzsche sees it, the Christian doctrine is simply incompatible with the Christian practice. No matter how anti-Machiavellian the Christian doctrine might sound, when put into practice, it reeks of Machiavellianism. Keeping Machiavelli's attacks on the political ineptitude of the popes in mind, one might think his praise of Pope Leo could be nothing more than sarcasm. But this may not necessarily be the case. It can be seen that Machiavellian brutality in politics is not supposed to be constantly carried out. Rather, it needs to be performed as few times as possible to stabilize power and thereupon be abandoned. So, to reconsider his praise of Pope Leo, we could say that once the papacy had been stabilized, his natural goodness and his countless virtues would suffice to maintain the papacy. On the contrary, what we see in Nietzsche is a much darker view. Christian political practice is brutally Machiavellian through and through. As it was discussed in the previous section, according to Nietzsche, Machiavellian practice can be found in Christianity. But the question is true Machiavellian politics achievable in general? Is Machiavellianism lock, stock, and barrel possible? In The Will to Power, we read that Machiavellianism is a type of perfection in politics. But as Nietzsche goes on, we are told that Machiavellianism is superhuman, divine, transcendental. It will never be achieved by man, at most approximated. Therefore, it could be argued that Nietzsche saw the Machiavellian prince as some sort of an Übermensch for whom our society is never ready. Or at the very least, it could be said that the Übermensch has Machiavellian traits. Another similarity between the two thinkers is their inclination towards war. They both encouraged their audience to wage war and saw war as necessary evil. Just as Machiavelli thought that a prince must not have any other object nor any other thought, nor must he adopt anything as his art but war, its institutions, and its discipline, Nietzsche also believed that a man should be raised for war and deemed everything else as folly. As Machiavelli writes, a prince should never take his mind from this exercise of war, and in peacetime he must train himself more than in time of war. It is not difficult to see why this kind of rhetoric was attractive to Nietzsche. After all, we are talking about a philosopher who wrote, "You should love peace as the means to new wars." Yet one should be cautious here. Although Nietzsche might have sympathized with Machiavelli's warlike rhetoric, it seems to me that what he took from the prince was not an appreciation for physical combat. Rather, Nietzsche adopted only the rhetoric of the prince. As Zarathustra tells his listeners, "Wage your war and for your thoughts." So what is it about the Machiavellian prince that makes him a prototype for the Übermensch? It cannot be just his warlike nature. As we mentioned, in my view, Nietzsche adopted Machiavelli's rhetoric and discarded the literal message of the prince. Accordingly, perhaps what Nietzsche found most attractive in the Machiavellian prince was his ability to introduce a new politics. Based on what Machiavelli writes, if someone was willing to acquire a principality based on their virtue, they would face a lot of challenges and difficulties along the way. But once their position was secured, they would be more successful than an ordinary prince who gained his positions through fortune or bloodline. There are two things to note here. Firstly, such a prince is praiseworthy because of his own virtues, a sentiment that a romantic like Nietzsche must have found appealing. Secondly, such a prince would have to live dangerously because he was a presenter of new political orders. In other words, a prince who raises himself to high ranks is, in Nietzsche's view, someone who breaks their tablets of values, the breaker, the lawbreaker. Here we see another Nietzschean sentiment, destruction. However, the prince does not destroy just for the sake of destruction. He destroys in order to create. And here we have our final Nietzschean sentiment. The mentioned prince might be a lawbreaker and a destroyer, but in reality he is the creative one. For by destroying the old order, he brings about a new one.